What if? Some great minds continue to ponder the future of broadcasting, but what if there was a way to turn radio on its head while concentrating on the arts, community, and publicly supported radio? Our next guest embraces a model of part broadcaster, part cultural institution. With a look at Alberta's historic CKUA, we talk with CEO Marc Carnes.
Broadcast Chronicles, revealing the most surprising, compelling, and even shocking stories behind some true characters from the other side of the microphone. Here's Bruce Clagan.
CKUA is not only a well-known entity in Alberta broadcasting, but after close to 100 years of existence, it's an institution that now focuses on connection, the cultural space, and reaching a very wide demographic. Joining the conversation is CKUA CEO Marc Carnes as we talk about where it is now and how it got there.
Yeah, it's a storied history. Lots of ups and downs over 96 years, as I'm sure you can imagine. We started at the University of Alberta. We were part of the faculty extension. They were getting tired of driving around country roads and delivering, farm reports and extension classes in church basements all over the place in the middle of the winter. So they got a grant to get us up and running as a radio station and flip the switch. And then we became the first educational and public broadcasters. So we're a startup that spun off into the government of Alberta in the 40s. And we stayed there as part of the education network with the government of Alberta. And then in 1997, during, a lot of cuts that were happening in Alberta at the time, we were decommissioned overnight. And then 6 weeks later, the community had rallied, raised $1 million and proceeded to wrestle the license away from the province and reboot us as a donor-supported independent entity that we are today.
Why is it so successful? What's the magic sauce, as they say, I guess?
Yeah. There's a lot of reasons. I think, I think one of the things is because we're listener supported, our listeners are loyal and this is their station. And so, they're like our shareholder, if you will. And so, that passion extends beyond just, their immediate circles and into the broader world. And I think part of it is, we have a strong commitment to the local community. So we have our headquarters are in Edmonton. We have a studio in Calgary as well. We have 16 transmitters across the province. We were the first radio station in Canada to stream online. So we've been building a global audience since 1996. But it really comes back to that connection, really giving a sense of place. And, we are deeply committed to the independent music sector and the arts sector, especially across Alberta. But, we're a platform for a lot of artists that aren't going to get that exposure in commercial radio, and they're not going to get that exposure in traditional media. So we're looking for the underdogs. We're looking for the ones that, for a lot of artists, will be their first airplay. And then they go on and they start to tour across Alberta, filling halls, and they go, oh, that's because CKUA listeners are following us. And then they go to the festival stages and they start, headlining in festival stages, and it's the CKUA was there since the beginning. So we had this incredible connection between what CKUA is, and we really call ourselves as a community. My position is that CKUA is an arts and cultural institution. We just happen to use broadcasting as our way of building and growing community. And so, that philosophy, I think, transcends through the connections that our hosts make with our listeners, the connection that our hosts make with the artists. And so there's a special Venn diagram in there that is something that's very, very different.
Yeah, you came into this through the arts community yourself.
Yeah.
Tell me about your story.
Yeah, I was an outsider for quite some time. I think I still am to some people, but I've always worked in the cultural space. So, I worked with the Edmonton Symphony Orchestra. I did cultural work in the Maritimes, in Toronto. I was chair of the board of the Edmonton Fringe Festival, which is the biggest fringe festival in North America. So I've always had that's been my place. And what I love about it is there's this really strange tension between creativity and business, and right in the middle of there that's where the fun sort of takes place. And so when my predecessor Ken Regan had been at the helm for about 20 years, went to retire, he was really our first CEO after we had come back on the air in 97. And so they were really struggling with what's the job description for this? Because CKUA is part cultural institution and part broadcaster. And So I got a call from the search firm and they said, would you like to come in? And I'm like, well, I'm not a broadcaster. Like I did college radio for a couple of years, but it's never been my background. And they said, well, how would you approach this? And I said, well, I would take an outsider's view to this and, and look at it as a cultural institution. And just how do we broaden our mandate as a broadcaster by looking at ourselves as a cultural institution? And that was sort of the start of the process. And then, yeah, next thing you know, I'm tapped with the job, and it's been 7 years, and we've seen some really good growth. We've done some really interesting change management and transformation of some of our business model, and we've we brought some new voices on. We've seen audience growth across 3 key demos and across the province and around the world. It's a pretty, again, I think you can do that in a place like CKUA because it's not about the medium, it's about the community behind it. And so, yeah, it's been a wild ride for sure.
Audience growth amongst 3 demos, 3 key demos. Now you're talking the corporate media speak.
Yes.
Isn't that odd? Isn't that a little bit odd?
It's a little bit odd. But at the end of the day, like we're a business, right? Like we're a nonprofit, we're a charity, but we're still a business. We still have to operate with the same fundamentals that everybody else does. I mean, our license is a specialty commercial English language license. It's a very weird, special thing that was left over from our time with the province. So we're still held to the same standards as Bell and Rogers and CTV and everybody else. So we have to operate with that mindset. There has to be a sort of a corporate business mindset to it. But we don't let that lead the conversation. We don't let that lead our decision making. We just make sure that we're crossing our T's and dotting our I's in the background. So, I think, we have to grow demos. I mean, again, if you think about arts and cultural organizations, the gray hair is predominant in a lot of the audiences. And so part of my mandate when I came on was, well, what's the next generation?
Yeah.
How do they listen to radio? Do they listen to radio? How does digital fit into this? Because we were a very old school, traditional, terrestrial radio station before. And how do you bring those along? So demo is key, but demo is not, demo is a trailing indicator to what we're trying to do with our audience, which is connect through a shared set of values and passions. If you can find people on that level, the age is a secondary piece, and so that's what we've been really focusing on is what is common between somebody who's 18 and somebody who's 80, who might live in rural Alberta or in Edmonton or Calgary or somewhere halfway around the planet. And so that's where like the demo is an important thing, because if you hit the values connection right and you hit the community connection right, people across all age demos will come with you. And that's what we're seeing.
So how do you get programming in there? Because it's not even easy when you're a commercial broadcaster and you're dealing with a really tight demo. Your demo, as you explained, is not tight. It's broad.
It's broad.
It's public supported radio. And still at the end of the day, you have to come up with programming. How does that work? What is the programming model?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, we're different in the sense that we have 33 regular hosts. So we do 126 hours of programming a week. It's all new content every week. And so, like the idea of sort of homemade, homegrown radio is very much in our blood. So all of our hosts produce their own shows. They curate their own programming. Most of it's music format. We do interviews with several hundred artists throughout the year and that type of thing too, but it's primarily music format. And so what we have been going through is, I would sort of call it iterative change with radical intent. And so, a lot of what CKUA is a reflection of who you are, right? It's a values play. So our audiences reflect our hosts, right? And they feel like part of a community. So, our audience was, graying. And so a lot of our hosts were getting up there too. And so, we have seasoned broadcasters who've been in the game 40, 50, 60 years. So what we've been doing is, as they've been stepping out and retiring down and cutting back their hours, we've been introducing new hosts that reflect the audience we're trying to attract, the audience of Alberta of today. And so there's more diversity in that. There's more, the age profile is now, hosts who are in most cases 30s and 40s, 50s. Our target growth market is sort of in that late 30s to early 50s kind of sweet spot for us. And I can get into why about that in a bit. But, so bringing in hosts as opportunities open up in the schedule, we're not trying to force anything. We're just taking advantage of things as they go. And so we've introduced, about 15 or 16 new voices in the last 5 or 6 years into the schedule, and much more reflective of the demo that we're trying to go after. It's sort of, you can sort of see it. It's, when you belong to a community, you want to belong to people who are like you. And so one of the big, I think one of the challenges we had when I first started was you talk to people who are in their 30s and 40s and they're, do you listen to CKUA? Well, no, that's my parents' station. And so you would look at the host roster and you'd be like, yeah, that looks like my parents. And so as we've been sort of, getting more hosts that represent that next generation of music tastes and different presentation styles, and you're more likely to see those people in certain music venues rather than other music venues that are maybe geared toward an older audience. It informs how we go out we're very active in the festival scene here in Alberta, which is a pretty
Right.
sector. So it informs which festivals we go to. It informs how we engage on the ground there too. So it's really like we're looking at this as it's about evolving our brand to be relevant, and honoring those who have been around for a long time, but something that's relevant to a younger generation as well. But behind all of that, again, as I said, it's this values connection. These are CKUA listeners, like literally right now, there's somebody in an oil field somewhere. There's somebody in a high rise in Calgary. There's a teacher in Lloydminster, and there's a retiree in Kelowna listening to CKUA and getting the exact same experience.
Mark, as you're saying this and as I'm listening, I know that a lot of people are thinking, okay, everything I hear about what you're doing in Alberta at CKUA is very similar to what I know in the States with some of the NPR stations.
Yep.
There are similarities and there are differences. What are they?
Well, I mean, in the States, you've got NPR. They are an umbrella organization for a lot of local stations. And so, the akin to that would be as if the CBC was an umbrella to us, but the reality is that they're not. So there's that component to it with NPR. So they have the resources to really kind of bridge an entire community-based broadcast system across the States. I think in the States, you've also got, the model of the radio station in the States doesn't exist up here. There's like two of us. There's Jazz FM in Toronto and us in terms of independent nonprofit broadcasters that are professional. So there's the ecosystem is really broad and big in the States. So you have music format stations, you have news stations, you have some that do both. But it is really based around that local component, like you being as locally relevant and in the community as much as possible. And I think that's I think, again, part of what people really appreciate about us too, is that we're live as much as we can be, and we're local, and we're talking about what's happening in the venues, and we're talking with the artists who are playing in the community. And that's very similar to what you hear in the States, is that really local focus.
How come it's not picking up in Canada as much?
It's a good question. I think, the college network is pretty strong here in Canada. But it's most of the time it's funded by student fees, and they have a very different mandate, right? They have to reflect the campus life. I've often wondered why it doesn't work on a bigger scale in Canada. I think, the CBC just being a public institution, I think that skews a lot of what our perception is of public radio. We struggle with this all the time, is that people who don't know our business model think that we're government funded, and we're not. And so, there's sort of the CBC just casts such a big shadow over the country, not in a bad way, but just by virtue of being such a massive institution within the country, that I think it takes away some of that local piece. I think there's room for more local. I think, some of the some of the stuff we're seeing with, Bell recently, and, smaller operators picking up some more of the local pieces is there. So I think there's an opportunity for it. I think the nonprofit challenge, the nonprofit piece is the challenge, right? We've been a nonprofit for, since day one. So I think it's hard for somebody to come in and try to create that audience base now at the scale that we're doing in a nonprofit model. You need money behind you to kind of get up and going.
Some of the NPR stations in the States have a mix of music similar to what you're doing with music. Some are very jazz oriented or different models or breakaway formats.
Yeah.
But one thing that they do in the States at the NPR stations is they go really big into journalism, into radio news.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that's expensive, I understand. But do you think there is a place in your model for that?
I think there's a place in our model for that. But to your point, the cost of it is really difficult. So we had a newsroom until 2011. And we were paying for that because we had built the early warning system across Alberta. Mm-hmm. And the government was paying us a babysitting fee for the year of almost $1 million. And so when they put the license or the contract out for tender, they gave it to somebody else who promptly messed it up. But when we lost that fee, we had to cut our newsroom. And so, that the cost of doing it is there. I think when you look at some of the commercial newsrooms that are out there, I think where I struggle with the newsrooms in the media landscape right now is that is news a vehicle for profit or is news a public good? And I don't, and what we're
Which
seeing
is a big question, I argue,
exactly.
right now that's going to come up more and more.
Exactly.
And I think that is, you've hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
That is what we're going to be talking about in the next few years.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And so, if news is a public good, then I think different business models are the way it needs to go, whether it's a co-op model where your listener is an owner. That's sort of similar to why we're doing so well with the loyalty of our listeners is because they feel like they own it. I think, putting the power of news and media into the community's hands has a huge amount of upside. Because when you make decisions based on profit and shareholder interest, it's not serving your customer. It's not serving the people on the ground, right? Whereas, I think when you look at sort of CKUA and our model, everything we do is about our listener. Everything, because there is no profit motive and everything is about we need more listeners to make more donations. And so that's our primary drive. I think there's yeah, it is a big question about what's going to happen in the future, but I think, that community-owned model is probably the most stable way of going about it. Now, I wish I had the answer because I'd be retired on a beach somewhere.
Is it really truly inclusive CKUA, or is it kind of activist-oriented? How do you work with that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Coming out of 97, I would say definitely we're much more of an activist-oriented organization. We were saved by the folk community. We were saved by the blues community. And, there is an activist spirit to that group. And keep in mind, back in 1997, right? So internet wasn't really a thing yet. And so at the time, if you lived in Alberta, let's say you had 20 stations to choose from on the radio dial, there would be 14 commercial radio stations. Then there would be, 5 talk radio stations, and then there was CKUA. And so CKUA was, if you didn't want commercial radio, it was your only place. It was really an extension of you. And so when it was gone, the activist base was really the ones that rose up for sure. Now we trade in an arts medium, so it tends to be, I'd say skew slightly left. But as an Alberta place, we bridge the urban-rural divide in this province. We're one of the only places that does that, and so we have everybody from, as I said, guys working on rigs. We have, I know of a couple of listeners who were at the Coots border during so it's everybody. We are, if we were a political party, we'd be the big tent party,
right?
Because it's again, no matter what your interests are politically or otherwise, we can all get behind music. We can all get behind something that is universal. And so, we have a lot of listeners who love the fact that we're not government supported, which is a very, conservative mindset. We have a lot of listeners who are like, why isn't the government at the table? And that's, the other side of the mindset. So yeah, we definitely bridge the whole side of the province. But yeah, we definitely skew more left. But part of what we do too is we do everything in our power to take the politics out of it.
Yeah.
We'll be topical, but we won't be political. And so we're very careful about who we give airtime to. And even if you think about sort of the Black Lives Matter movement coming up, well, when it did, a good example of that was, our hosts were like, well, how do we engage with this? Because it's such a forefront thing. And we said, let the art do the talking. We don't have to editorialize. Like, if you want to show your support, then play some of the greatest Black artists out there right now. Bring up the arts projects that are happening across the province in support of this, but we don't have to editorialize it. We can let.
But that's almost a journalist way of looking at how things would be done. But you're doing it with the arts and doing it with music.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, we're what's left after arts and culture coverage was cut out of mainstream media.
Yeah.
It's not in, you can't read the Edmonton Journal, the Calgary Herald, and hear about what's going on locally. We've seen what happened with radio stations and local TV. And so we're filling a huge gap in the market, and very, very deliberately. It's something that, even with the CBC, I mean, it's a national station. We got a couple of, we got our drive times, on Monday to Friday, and a couple other shows, but otherwise it's all nationally programmed, usually out of Ontario. And so, most of the listening experience with CBC isn't even local anymore. And so we're filling a gap that, I think more and more people are looking for, which is that local voice.
Let's talk about connection. With that local voice, talking about donations, obviously very important. That's how you stay on the air. So you have gone through and continue to go through campaigns. Mm-hmm. There's also been that threat. We've heard that if we don't raise a certain amount of money by September 2024, we're going to shut down. Yeah. Those threats, are they real?
Yeah.
Wow.
It's, and here's the kicker in what we're going through right now. So we have to raise $3 million by September 30th to not run our reserves dry. And the challenge with it is our audiences are growing. 18 to 34 was our fastest growing audience in Calgary last year. Our fundraising revenues have remained steady. In fact, we're slightly up year over year. And when you think about the nonprofit sector right now and how many organizations are struggling, our advertising sales have remained steady when we see what's happening in the commercial media market with advertising. So this has nothing to do with the viability of what we do. But what we're dealing with inflationary pressures like everybody else. And our listeners who are donors are feeling the pain at home. And then the other challenge is that our broadcast center in Edmonton is half commercial real estate. And when we opened the building 12 years ago, a nonprofit diversifying into real estate was a masterstroke. And then, a thing like a pandemic comes along, and, last year, our primary tenant becomes insolvent and our building is half empty and not drawing any revenues anymore, while being more expensive than ever to operate. And it's a perfect storm. So it's been really tough to sort of rationalize and you're like, what are we doing wrong? Well, we're not doing anything wrong. We're just trying to handle what's going on in the marketplace. And so we had to come forward to our listeners, and we tried outreach with the province, and we tried outreach with the federal government, and we waited till the federal budget came down, and there was no help for us there. And so we had to come to our listeners and be like, look, guys, we're not crying wolf here. This is the reality of the situation. We need to increase our fundraising revenues. Yeah.
Hey, what is the future, do you think? And what sort of influence will you have on the Canadian broadcasting landscape, if any?
Yeah. I think when I see what's happening on a national scale, I think what we've lost sight of in the broadcasting world is that local connection. It's so much of it's centralized decision making. It's not on the ground. And that's what we really, really do, is we champion that. The analogy I give to somebody who doesn't really quite understand where we fit in sort of the market is, top 40 radio, commercial radio serves to fill the Rogers Places of the world. College radio serves to fill the garages of the world and the tiny little clubs. But there's nobody filling that mid-market, which used to be filled by mainstream media.
Yeah.
And so, that's where we fill. We fill the local venues, the local concert halls, the festival scene, and all that stuff. And I think that's what I think if anybody can take a lesson from us, that's what it is we're ignoring the middle of the market. which is the critical piece to the music ecosystem, is giving our artists the chance to like not go from nobody to a Spotify star, but work their way up, do their hard knocks and build their career, in the local communities. So, I think that's probably a big lesson, or the thing that I see missing in the sector is just we've lost what it means to be on the ground with our listeners.
Are you optimistic?
I am optimistic. I think what we're going through right now is, yes, it's a fundraising mechanism, but it's also, we're sending a message. This is something that thousands of people, like thousands of households across Alberta, across Canada, around the world, believe so much in that they will give their hard-earned dollars for something they can get for free because we mean so much to them. And the outpouring from artists and listeners and musicians and the arts community has been like unreal. We have Blue Moon Marquee like putting up a post about how important CKUA is to their career and their journey to winning a Juno, and all of these artists that we were their first kick at the can in the Canadian market, and they've gone on to do great things. And so we've built up that connection that leaves me like completely positive. I mean, the challenge right now is just we have to generate enough money to sort of keep the engine running against all these market forces that aren't going to go away anytime soon. But in the short term, absolutely, like our listeners are already standing up in record numbers.
And when you hear Marc Carnes talk about those listeners and support, the idea of values-driven radio, well, it's paramount. Yes, it is public-supported radio, and yes, it is based in one province, Alberta. But is there a lesson in there when it comes to the future of broadcasting? And can that future be defined by the station that, as Marc explained, was the very first to embrace radio streaming in this country?
Broadcast Chronicles is written and hosted by Bruce Claggett. Music, Follow Your Heart Via Upbeat. Graphic design, Creative Shovel. I'm Sarah McKenzie. Subscribe to Broadcast Chronicles wherever you download your favorite podcasts. This has been a BFC Communications production.